First, I want to say thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here and to meet everybody and to learn with you as we share our ideas. When I was first asked to do this welcome, I thought, oh God, I am not the one in our community to do traditional openings and welcomes and prayers. So I called one of my tribal aunties, one of our elders, and I said, what do I do? And she said, share what's important to me. And so I'm really excited to be able to share a little bit about who we are as Wampanoag people and what that means to me. So the word Wampanoag in our language means people of the first light. And if you look at a map, we are not the most eastern people. We are actually an ancient people because at one point we were the most eastern people. There was a point where there's ice sheets that were here on this land, and above north. So our name is so old that it reflects who we were so long ago, the people of the first light. And with that, it carries a lot of responsibility. We are the ones who welcome the day, the birth of the day. When you watch the sunrise, it comes out of the ocean, and it's dark, and then it slowly gets lighter and lighter, and then you see these immense, beautiful colors. And when I think as a mother about giving birth, about what that looks like, the amniotic fluid is very close in nature to ocean water. So it has a lot of significance in holding that responsibility of birthing the day. And as Wampanoag people, we will be there to witness that and also to reflect upon the things we're thankful for, the things that are there that contribute to that day. It's not just about us, it's about the ocean waters, it's about the living beings in the ocean, it's about the dunes, the beach grass, the birds, and it's a moment that we reflect upon our connection in that ecosystem. And we also take that time to think about who we are as stewards of that space. So while we're here, I would like to invite all of you to take some time to go to the beach and to take advantage of being in this very special place, to welcome the day and think about where you fall within that ecosystem and the kind of stewardship you can offer to this space. So thank you for being here, and we really welcome you to this beautiful land that we call home. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for opening us up in that good way and presencing us with the land and your people. Just to get us grounded a little bit more, I'd love to invite you all just to have like a little moment to get grounded. So let's close our eyes. Panelists, you can do this too. And let's just move our feet to the ground a little bit. So pick your heels up, put pick your toes up, and just kind of oscillate between kind of that movement of your ankle, toes up and feet down. Just do that a few times. And then slowly come to a pause, a natural stopping of where your feet land. And let's just take one in-breath together to just kind of set ourselves and, continue to get grounded. So inhale and exhale. Thank you. It's really good to be here with you all and to build on this very sweet grounding that you brought us into, Jennifer. I'd like to just continue to follow protocol. Jake, thank you for your intros. But I also know that we all come from various traditions, and I just want to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves in a way that feels appropriate to all of your different places and where you're coming from. So, Ruth, if you don't mind starting us out?
Han Matakiafi. Hello, my relatives. My name is Chanko Dutawi, Red Road Woman, or Ruth Burns is my English name. I come from, I was born on the Standing Rock Reservation, and I am a member of the Sistan-Moptinuyate. We are both Dakota Lakota people. So that's something I was talking about with panelists earlier. There's 9 tribes in South Dakota, and they're all from the same nation, but we were separated into different reservations and by band, basically. So there were 7 bands, so they kind of divvied it up between us, but we were all the same nation. I am a chief judge of my tribe, Sistan-Moptinuyate. We're based on the Lake Traverse Reservation in northeastern South Dakota. We do overlap the state boundaries into North Dakota and Minnesota because we predate the state boundaries. We're a treaty tribe. I write. I've been writing since 2012. I've kind of switched my focus over to more legal, judicial, working for various tribes throughout the Dakotas for the last 7 years. And I'm just delighted to be here.
Koana?
Hi, how are you doing? I'm Kona Chasing Horse. I'm Han Gwichin from Eagle Village, Alaska, and Ogallala and Sichangu Lakota from South Dakota. So relative. I am from Alaska. I grew up in Alaska, and I do a lot of work in sustainability and fashion. I'm a model, so I have to find a balance in my advocacy work. I've been doing land protection and climate work since I was a little girl. So, falling into fashion has been an interesting journey, and I do my best to show up and advocate for, what I do as an advocate and make sure that everywhere I show up in a good way. I was raised by a single mom. She taught me everything that I know. I think the biggest thing that I share with everybody is, the matriarchy is so powerful, and that's how our communities operate, is through a matriarchal system. And so the patriarchy is foreign to me. I don't know what that is, and the only reason why I kind of know what that is because I'm forced to be in a patriarchal system. And showing up here with a bunch of matriarchs, thank you for your land acknowledgement, and I'm very honored to be here on your people's land. It's so beautiful and important that we uplift one another, so I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you for putting together such an incredible group of badass women. I'm happy to be one of them. Thank you for sharing space with me.
Buju Nindinoy Maganatug. I greet you all as relatives, and I greet the relatives that give us life today, the beautiful sun shining on us, the water we drank, the land we stand on, the food we had, the company we keep, the smiles on each of your faces. So, hello, my name is Melissa Nelson. I am a proud member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in North Dakota, so identify as Anishinaabe, Cree, Métis. I'm also Norwegian from my father, come from a long line of Norwegian farmers, also North Dakota. And Nin Piju Dodem, I'm a member of the Lynx clan. And I was born and raised in Pomo, Coast Miwok, Sinkyone territory in Northern California. So a lot of my work has been as a relocated mixed-race Native woman in service to the first peoples of the land I grew up in Northern California. And I do that through a few organizations, the Cultural Conservancy, Tamalpais Trust, and I also work in academia as a professor at Arizona State University. So I'm a person who likes to translocate across beautiful Turtle Island, and I'm a pollinator and like to move across many different spheres. And I'm just really honored and so blessed to be with these badass women to talk to you about the powerful, incredible movement of landback and land rematriation. Chimigwich.
So, Winikisak Natasawis Jennifer Randolph. I am an Aquino Wampanoag member. My tribe is located on the island of Martha's Vineyard, which is not too far from here, and we are at the end of the islands where there's just these amazing, beautiful clay cliffs that are multicolored, and they derive from the glaciers that moved through this area during the receding of those ice sheets. And they dug up soils from the ages of the dinosaurs. So if you go into the cliffs, you can actually see like these ginormous shark remnants. And it's just an amazing, beautiful place. And it reminds me a lot of cultural and climate change and how we're just here for a short time and the earth is so much older than us. But I am a mother. I think that's the most important role I feel I play. I have 3 beautiful daughters and 13 nieces. So matriarch is my role. My dad is Portuguese, so he comes from the Azores. So all of the women in my line are Wampanoag, and I think that carries a lot of responsibility to my community. I grew up just on this side, not too far from here, and I moved back to the island, to my homelands, when I was in my early 20s. And it was that time where I had cousins and other people in my family going through a lot of violence. And I started my work in domestic violence and sexual assault about 2013, doing community assessments, working with the women within my community, and building an advocacy program. And it didn't take long to connect the need for reconnection and rematriation to land in that work. So we were blessed last year to be able to receive 8 acres of land in Aquina, which may not seem like much to some, but it was $1.67 million to get that land back. And so we're now in the process of developing a space where we can be one in connection with nature for healing, to develop food for sustainability, to provide safe housing for people who need to heal, and to teach our younger generations on healthy relationships and how to be good to each other and good to the space that we live in.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and I'll just follow the trend and intro myself a little bit, just to also be a part of the sharing of our languages. I just love that we're hearing Gwich'in, we're hearing Lakota, we're hearing Anishinaabe and your language, and so Yate Shike Dosha Dene She'e Jade Bigay. So I'm Dene as well as Tsuge Pueblo, and yeah, I feel like I resonate with what you shared, Melissa, about being a pollinator. I wear many hats, and mostly situated in the climate justice, environmental justice space, working in policy and research, and that's what I'm very focused on right now, is developing a body of research on how climate change is impacting Native people in the U.S. in particular. So great to be here with you all, and also to see community and faces that, are familiar here, and good to see new faces. Okay, so diving in, the panel is about going back to the land and land back. And I think we have to acknowledge that no one person started land back. It's a calling, it's a original instruction from our ancestors, because everything was taken from them. Everything was attempted to be taken from them. And so in many ways, a lot of our work is to honor what they started in all our various regions. And so I'd love to hear from each of you how you define land back. What does going back to the land mean to you? And yeah, do you want to start, Jennifer, since we're here in your land?
Sure. Land back is so important. It touches every aspect of our lives. When I think about what that really means, it's about reconnection, a regrounding. We recently, and actually I won't be a we, it's Jessie Little Doe was revitalized our language. And she was able to do this through Bibles that were used to convert us, during forced assimilation. And the first Bibles that were printed here were in Wampanoag, and there was notes written in the borders of those Bibles by Wampanoag people. And someone described the conversion as being a tree with their roots being uprooted, being so close but yet so far from what you need. And when I think about land back, I think of it as more of a rerouting and a reconnection to our life source of all those things.
Yeah, there's, over 570 nations in the U.S. alone, and that's not even including all the unrecognized and then all the amazing indigenous peoples around the world. So there's no one definition of land back, and it'll mean different things to different communities, different nations, different individuals. For me, as an advocate for land back, a lot with unrecognized tribes in California who were cut off and erased and suffered the politics of erasure, and for them to come back and even have an agreement with a private landowner or a park to have access to their traditional lands, even for a few weeks out of the year, is land back, right? They may not own title to it, but it's restoring relationships to those ancestral lands. To me, that's land back. Ultimately, I think we want our ultimate sovereignty over those lands, but again, what that means, for some it does mean through a federally recognized tribe, through others it may mean through nonprofits, because you have a little more flexibility and freedom and you don't have the Boss Indians Around Bureau of Indian Affairs overseeing you all the time. So for me, land back is very much about restoring, in our Anishinaabe word, the word for medicine, mashkiki, has the word aki, which is our word for the earth. So if you break down the word for medicine, it literally means the strength of the earth. And so for us, restoring our land is restoring our medicines. It's restoring our health and well-being. It's restoring our connection to those ancestors and to future generations. So, land is everything to Indigenous peoples. So that's just a little overview of what it means to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I can just really agree with what they said and just kind of add my little experience in that. I think it's so important, not just for us Indigenous people, but for people outside of our communities to understand and also have a relationship with the land back movement. And it can be, as you said, restoring your relationship to the land and also recognizing whose land you're on, and, paying respect and, learning about those peoples, those tribes that, lost so much for us to be here. I think that's the biggest thing. Everywhere I go, I travel a lot for work. Everywhere I go, I always look into, even if it's overseas or wherever, I try to look into like who stewarded these lands and who continues to steward these lands. And I am so blessed to have been involved at a very young age in kind of reclaiming not just our lands, but our languages. I mean, I feel like land back is almost like an umbrella term for a lot of our other movements because it's all so interconnected. And when we talk about one thing, it's hard not to talk about the other things. And land back for me is, not just stewardship, but sovereignty for our communities, and making sure that our lands are in the hands of people that love their home. And also, I think it's so hard for people to see how land back is an umbrella term because they don't understand how these issues are so connected. I mean, it's so connected to MMIW. It's so connected to, oil and gas and extractive industries and, invasive species within our ancestral homes and having to navigate that in a very patriarchal colonial world, none of these systems were made for us to thrive, and we're surviving. But nowadays you're starting to see Native people take up that space, reclaim that, and understand, what land back means to them, and, what that means to other people, and how they can help other people understand that for themselves. And for me, it's really just being in community like this. Land back looks like this, as community, coming together as a collective to talk about these things, to show recognition, to, uplift our voices. And, we all come from different regions of Turtle Island, but we all share the same values. And I think that is the most beautiful thing about land back, is being able to be together in a community and talk about these things, but also connect and find similarities, and being able to be in solidarity with one another. So, yeah.
Land back is a very multifaceted topic. Everything that's been said up here is all land back. Just to kind of piggyback on what Kwana was saying, land back is everything back. It's restoration of everything that's been taken from Native peoples. So it's an aspect of that. I also see it as a mending of the sacred hoop. One of our medicine men, Black Elk, he is Lakota from the Oglala Nation. He spoke of the prophecy of mending the sacred hoop, when all people would be reunited again, of all races, colors, creeds, where we would be at peace. And he foresaw that happening in the future. And in order for that to happen, there has to be healing. And for healing, there has to be forgiveness. For forgiveness, there has to be a truth-telling. And so the phrase land back is really a truth-telling. It's acknowledging that there were people here before who predated the colonial United States. It's acknowledging their existence and their rights to that land. And the act of land back, actually returning land to the management and conservation or ownership of Native peoples, is follow through. So that's the action that's needed for that reconciliation to take place. So it really is part of the process of healing for this country and for the world.
Thank you all. And I just want to highlight and pull out that it's centered around healing and restoration. We heard these words come up a lot. We didn't hear things like revenge. We didn't hear things like it's about getting back at someone or something. And I think that that's just important, because sometimes people hear land back and they're like, ooh, you're going to push us out. And it's like, no, it's actually, and the way I see it as a climate justice advocate and leader on that front, is that it's also a way to prepare, not just for us as Indigenous people, but to help others prepare. When Indigenous people are stewarding lands, when we're managing lands, we're protecting everyone. We're creating protected spaces for everyone. So it's a solution to navigate this climate crisis we're all in, as far as one of the ways I see it. And I also just want to say that there are so many land back wins happening right now. There's truly like a renaissance of people doing amazing advocacy work, amazing fundraising work, because it's like it takes a lot of resources to either buy back land or fight for your lands. And there's all kinds of models of how that's happening. It's happening in South Dakota in the Black Hills. It's happening in the Arctic. It's happening in California. We're going to get to that in a moment. It's happening here on the East Coast. And so I just want to lift up that there are major land back wins happening across the country, and it's really an exciting time. To segue into Melissa, speaking of wins, you're a part of a big initiative that just took place in California in the Bay Area. It's one of the I would say really exciting land back wins lately, because it's urban. And so can you tell us about what's going on there and some of the challenges and opportunities that you guys are facing right now?
Yes. Miigwech, thank you. Yeah, I'm so honored to work with another group of badass Indigenous women known as the Sigorate Land Trust. We're the first ever, I think, in the world, urban Indigenous women's-led land trust. And based with a charismatic and dynamic leader, Karina Gould of Ohlone or Lishan Ohlone descent. And you may or may not know, but none of the indigenous peoples of central coastal California have federal recognition. So they just, the coast was too valuable to the early colonists, settlers, from the Spanish to the gold miners to later settlers, robber barons. So they have no recognized sovereign land for like 300 miles, pretty much from Santa Rosa to Santa Barbara, the whole beautiful coast. So, and of course, the San Francisco Bay Area was just an incredible urban area pre-contact. There were just villages of people all over, like here too, the coasts, the shellfish, the seafood, and the beautiful rivers and the forests, and there were so much resources. So they had urban areas in these shell mounds where they would put their layers of shells. I'm sure there's some over here. Anywhere there's coastal people, there's historic shell mounds. Sadly, anthropologists have called them garbage dumps, which is so disrespectful. It's just such denigration. These layers of shells, their ancestors, the abalone, the wampum here, were so important. They gave us life. We use them for our regalia, our ceremonies. The shells were money, so valuable. And so they layer up these shells and were so important. Their most esteemed chiefs and leaders were buried in them. So they're burial sites. And the whole San Francisco Bay was dotted with these large shell mounds, like 98% of them. There's one sacred site right in Berkeley. It's called the West Berkeley Shell Mound. Anyone hear of the West Berkeley Shell Mound? A handful of you. And the Ohlone people, the first peoples of the land, have been fighting to protect that site for decades and decades. It's right at a critical site, and as you probably know, the cost of living there, kind of like here, and the cost of housing there is huge. So through the Sigorate Land Trust, we put out this call to rematriate the land, and not just rematriate the land, but like my sisters are saying, rematriate our language, rematriate ancestors from museums and artifacts from museums and universities, rematriate our languages from, audio recordings. All that has to be returned in a sacred, good way. And so with this call to the community and the rise of this awareness, this national awareness of land back, reparations, restoration, really Standing Rock, I think, really galvanized a critical consciousness nationally for this to happen. And so we put out the call, and now Sigorate Land Trust, we manage 7 different properties, 7 different sites, from urban parks to land trust, to canyon lands, to houses, to urban apartments, and not just for the Ohlone people, but all Indigenous people and all people who need support. So that's what I love about Sigorate Land Trust. It's First Peoples first, and then intertribal people, and then those who need it. And it's very much focused on the health of women and mothers and children. And so there was this 2.2 acre contested land where we were doing illegal ceremonies, going over fences to pray to those ancestors in that beautiful site, and with the hope that it would be returned to the first people. And the property was for sale for $35 million. Because a developer wanted to dig down and make like a 4-story parking lot, and then like an 8-story high-rise, elite high-end apartments. And the sad thing is, they would have all sold like that for top dollar. That's just the way it is there with the tech industry and everything. So long story short, a 10-year battle, including several lawsuits, the city of Berkeley, thousands of hours of volunteer service by allies and intertribal groups and attorneys and activists. And long story short, finally, we convinced the landowner, who was very anti-native, had to convince her and put pressure on her legally, politically, spiritually to do the right thing, And she finally turned around. And it was, ironically, it's a woman. She finally turned around. The pressure was too great. She decided to give us a little deal. Instead of $35 million, it was $25 million. And with the gracious, incredible support, and they want to be known, to the Katali Foundation, who also supported your community, and the graciousness of many other donors and funders, we were able to meet that price and purchase it back and restore an urban sacred site for the first time since pre-contact.
Okay.
And that's a win for everybody, right?
It's a win for everybody. And I don't know if there's any funders in the room, but like, it's important to hire Indigenous program directors for these reasons. Kind of switching gears here. Thank you for sharing that story. So inspiring. So in the question around what does landback, something that came up a couple times was healing around violence. And Jennifer, you work with the network, the Kinship and Healing Network based here in this region, which addresses the challenge Native people and especially women face when it comes to gender-based violence. Can you talk and the reasons for why those like statistics and problems and challenges exist are so, I mean, they go back to contact, colonial contact, but can you talk about why these conditions exist for Native people and women and ways that you're addressing that?
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that. It does go back to the time of contact. Prior to contact, we didn't have these types of issues. I'm not saying things didn't happen, but it wasn't prevalent. And we know this because through the study of our languages, there is no word or words to describe rape or intimate partner violence in any of our languages on Turtle Island. So that speaks to, I have to say that today, Native women suffer violence at the highest rates than anyone else on this continent. 85% of Native women will experience violence in their lifetime. Murder is the third largest cause of death for Native women. And when you think about that, and you think about the fact that we didn't have these issues prior to contact, what happened? What happened was when people came here, they looked at the land and our people as resources, or something in the way of resources. So for us here on the East Coast, the first thing that was happening is we were being kidnapped off these beaches and brought back to Europe to be sold into slavery. The next thing was they took the timber, right? The trees. They cleared the land of the trees, and it's about extraction. And when you look at what intimate partner violence is, sexual violence is, it's really about power and control and the thought process that you have the right to somebody or to control something. It's the same thought process of extraction of land, resources, and people. So that's where it's really centered and rooted in. And that's why I think Native women experience violence at such high rates, because it was a sanctioned way of war. It's a sanctioned way of access to resources for so many years, hundreds of years. It was acceptable and promoted way of being. So it just kind of carries through. And we hold that historical trauma in us. So when we talk about how do you heal, how do you recover from that, you need to look at it from not just healing from that one rape, not just healing from that one violent partner that you are with, you need to think about the multi-generational harms that have been done. And the best way for healing for us is through our culture. There are studies been done, and even done by the government, that validate, these things that we knew to be true inside us. They're being validated by these studies. So when I look at our culture, and we think about, going back to our practices to heal, I found protective mechanisms that were in our culture that prevented these things from happening, such as women controlled the food systems. And when you married someone, the man would come into your house, your female. We had We2s, but your family, your community, and live with you. And if you weren't being treated right, you would just put his stuff out, and the community would recognize that and enforce your wishes, right? It's really about people having those sovereign rights as individuals to make those choices, and then the community supporting that and being mindful of how we are in relationship with everything. So we talk about how our relationship with plants, it's about sovereignty, recognizing that the earth has its own sovereign rights as well. So in our programming that we're developing, we are talking about restoring our own sovereignty as individuals, being able to make decisions for yourself. So often someone will call me after they've left an abusive situation with a lot of small questions on what they should do with minor life choices, because they're not used to making those choices for themselves anymore. So it's about supporting them and treating them as sovereign individuals. And a really good way to help someone come to that is through being in relationship with nature. As you're recognizing the sovereignty of the plants and the animals and of the land, you recognize the sovereignty of yourself. And these teachings are great for prevention. It's not just prevention, it's a way of life, it's a way of being. And so our work is really rooted in that aspect of it. And we recently were able to, like I said, get the 8 acres back, and we're looking to build a shelter. And it's not a shelter, it's like long-term restorative housing, so people can come and heal. Most shelters you can stay for 30 days, and then you have to go join the real world and get a job. And how can you do that in a productive, real, true, meaningful way when just 30 days ago you had a gun to your head? Like, that it's not feasible. You're going to have a lot of trauma. We're looking to really provide solutions and meaningful healing for people. So we want people to stay for a year, 2 years, so they can get that healing and be in connection to the land. We also want space for programs where we can teach our youth. We can have a food pantry and restore those ways of being that we had that were protective mechanisms prior to colonization, and also be an example of how we can be in relationship to land and be respectful of it. We think about conservation, and a lot of people think about hands off. And so many things really need to be in relationship with humans. We're growing sweetgrass, and there was a wonderful book done by Robin Weld Kilmer, and it was Braiding Sweetgrass. And in her book, she talks about proving that being in relationship and harvesting that sweetgrass in a good way is far better than that for that plant than it would be if you didn't do anything at all, because it needs to be picked. It needs that interaction. So.
A word that came up a lot in your sharing was this word sovereignty. It's actually come up a lot. And when we were chatting in prep for this conversation, Ruth, this is something that you work on. You are a judge. You work in federal law, which I will say, I don't quote me on the stat here, but there's a group out there called Illuminative. They do a lot of great, amazing research that has never been done before. And I think they found, like, out of, X amount of judges in the US, it was a very small number. It was like 1 in 10 judges know about Indian federal law, yet they're practicing law in the United States. our lands. And so right now, there's a lot happening regarding sovereignty. There's, of course, the beautiful winds we're hearing about, the beautiful healing work, protection of sovereignty. But we're also in a moment where there's a lot of threats to our sovereignty. And I would just love to hear from you. What are some of the big threats, and how do you see people trying to protect sovereignty? And also maybe just explain to us what sovereignty is too at a tribal level.
Sovereignty is not something that's granted to tribes, it's inherent. So that's something that we've always had before anyone landed on our shores. We were already here. We already had the right to govern our own tribe, our own membership. And so that's at the heart of what sovereignty is. Just our ability to live on our lands, provide for our people, and have our own government. So that's what sovereignty is. It's continually under attack. Where my land base is, the Siston-Wapton Lake Traverse Reservation, and it's primarily in South Dakota. And right now, we're having a dispute with the governor of South Dakota.
Kristi Noem.
Yes, Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, who has aspirations of being a VP pick. She has taken an adversarial stance against tribes in South Dakota. And so just last week, actually, my tribe, the Siston-Wapton, banned her from our lands, along with, yes. As of this week, all of the tribes in South Dakota have banned her from their tribal lands. So us asserting our sovereignty, you cannot come on our land if you're going to accuse us of being, basically in bed with drug cartels, which she accused tribal leadership of. And she also said some things about our children being hopeless, some disparaging remarks about Native parents.
During COVID, she tried to fine the tribes for
closing their borders.
Yeah.
Yes, on Cheyenne River. At the initial start of the COVID pandemic, some of the tribes took the steps of guarding their borders and monitoring who's coming in and out. Back then, when we knew very little about COVID, and we had a lot of members, and that was proven over time. We had a lot of people who were susceptible to COVID. A lot of elders passed away because of it. And so we tried to take those measures to protect our people, and she didn't like it. So we're dealing with that right now as far as asserting our sovereignty. And what's sad about it is she is in a position where she could do a lot of good. I mean, besides tribes, South Dakota in general has an issue with meth, with fentanyl. So it's not just us. It's all over the state. So there's a lot of things she could be doing to be working with tribes to deal with the problem. And instead, she's taken the position of being against us, and it's us versus them, and it's not really. So that's, I guess, what's on my mind right now. There are just battles going on all over the country, all over the world. Indigenous people taking a stand against extractive industries, trying to protect not only tribal lands, but ancestral lands, just land in general, being land protectors. And they're also caught up in the courts. We have like Thacker Pass, we have Oak Flat, trying to protect them from foreign conglomerates, from copper extraction. There's a lot of battles going on in Canada to protect the timber, to protect the land, protect the water. And so sometimes these get highlighted by mainstream media, but just because media decides to take their focus elsewhere doesn't mean that it's still not happening. And so it's such a huge topic. I guess I would just encourage people to follow Native media, follow environmental media, to find out who knows about what's going on the ground, who to contact to help. There's also independent journalists like Brenda Norrell. She's been around for decades, and she does a lot of groundwork. Also, Brandy Morin, who is First Nations in Canada. There's a lot of just little independent media groups. Let's see, Unicorn Riot, Ricochet, Atmos. Places you can look like that to see exactly what's happening right now as far as our fight for sovereignty, which is directly tied to protecting the land, protecting the water.
Absolutely. And I think another important point for allies, a lot of the things shared here are, yes, conditions created by colonization, but also by federal policy. The Dawes Act, which aimed to assimilate people and moved people off of their reservations into the Bay Area, into urban areas where they were then left with little to no resources and zero support for dealing with that tremendous grief of being forced from their homelands. So I think it's just important to also acknowledge that, like, our history is American history. It's your history. And there's so many ways to be an allyship by learning, like, why these conditions exist. So yeah, we've talked a lot about how resources, the desire or the greed for resources has led to lots of violence, not just to us as Native people, but to the land. Kawana, you're from Alaska, which is, many people don't know this, but which is warming at a rate that is 2 times higher than the rest of the country. Can you tell us about the impacts you're seeing in your homelands? And also, because we also want to talk about solutions, the ways people are growing solutions and adapting to these changes.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like Alaska's so far removed from the rest of the US. No one really talks about Alaska or what's going on in Alaska. I mean, we get fires as intense as, California. We get so much, as Jade said, it is thawing twice the rate. Actually, there's another study that said it's now being seen as 4 times the rate. And that went up since 2019, which is really scary. We've been fighting the Willow Project. We've been fighting Ambler Road. We've been fighting so much. I mean, there's so many wins, but there's still so many things that we are like fighting really hard for. And in Alaska right now, I mean, we're still kind of on edge waiting to hear more about what's going on with the Willow Project. That project was actually really scary. My work as an advocate in the beginning was just focused solely on the Arctic Refuge and the sacred land where life begins. That's what we call it. It's the birthing grounds of our caribou, and it's the most sacred place to our people. It was so sacred to us, we stayed away from those lands because that is solely for the caribou, that is solely for the fish, for the bears, that is their home. And a lot of people don't know why a lot of animals kind of seek refuge in the Arctic Refuge, in the sacred place where life begins. And it's because it's in a perfect spot within Alaska, kind of in this, of course, mountain ranges, but also it's kind of near the ocean. So the ocean breeze keeps mosquitoes from getting too intense because mosquitoes can kill a baby caribou. And so there's so many reasons as to why they only birth there. They only go there to birth. It's one of the safest places for them to go. And we've been fighting to protect these lands for generations. I'm the 4th generation fighting to protect those lands. It's been under threat for years and years and years. And I think the scariest part of that was actually seeing the Trump administration and the Biden administration. The Biden administration made promises. He told our people that he would stand with us, and inevitably, we all know how that ends up. And so, I never really had full faith. I've experienced so much betrayal and mistrust with, broken treaties, with, the government. So, I solely wanted to focus on sovereignty within our communities and make sure that our people have those resources. And I think having access to so much, being in the fashion industry has kind of opened doors for me to help educate people that can actually make a difference, that have the resources, that have the money. And getting Native peoples in Alaska that kind of funding to be able to continue to do this work. There's so many organizations in Alaska that do such great work within our communities. And I've had the pleasure of working with basically all of them. And, you know, there's the saddest thing for me, though, is within this movement, we're kind of now really, you know, leaning towards the youth. We want to hear the youth, and that's amazing. I love being a part of that space. We need these new perspectives, but we also forget about our elders that have been doing this work for generations. And I really wanted to focus on connecting with all of the elders that have been doing this, that have been in these rooms, in these spaces, you know, at the rallies, like at the forefront within our communities. And you know, they're tired. They're tired. They don't want to have to see us doing the work. They wanted it to end with them. And so the fact that we're having to continuously do this work, and as these women all said, you know, there's so many, and I just loved how you kind of went down and talked about these different things in that order, because it's so interconnected. You went from one thing to the other, and it's all so, you know, we're all from different regions, as I said before, but we all share so much similarities within our communities. And, you know, in Alaska, I grew up hunting, fishing, and I think the reason why I feel so passionately about this is because it's not just something that I seen on Instagram and I seen a polar bear, you know, trying to get on a piece of ice. It's, you know, my family and my communities are actually actively starving. We're actively, you know, being forced to not fish, to not hunt. We have to pay to hunt. And we're actually currently banned from fishing because the salmon are depleting in population. My village is the furthest north on the Yukon River. And so my tribe is split by the Canadian border. And as you said, you know, before that, we outdate these borders. And so the saddest part is, you know, back even just a couple of years ago, we had, you know, thousands of fish coming up and we were able to harvest. And we'd go to fish camp every summer. I learned how to fillet at a very young age. It was just a part of me. I loved it. I was excited. We'd go pick berries. We'd go play in the water. We'd make fish strips and we'd steal some, you know, and run off and act like we don't know where it went. There's so much, you know, wellness in that. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're all talking about too, is how being connected to nature and being outside and connecting to your culture does so much for, you know, our wellness. And having that, you know, being my upbringing and, you know, having a single parent, a mom, you know, one of the only women in our communities that actively, you know, went out hunting and took us hunting and fishing every single year, because we actually did not have the access to groceries. We did not have access to a lot of things that everyone else had access to. We had a little beater car and it would freeze in the wintertime. So we had a dog team. So I grew up with a dog team, and my mom is still actively a dog musher. And that's how we feed our dogs, fish. Every time we harvest fish, we harvest for our dogs. Our dogs eat better than we eat. It's just, they're our family. You know, we care for them and we love them, and they're working dogs, so they need that nutrients. And I think that's one of the things that I always bring up to people that aren't familiar. And like, if they don't care about us and how we're feeling and how we're doing, you know, usually they care more about animals. And so I always try to bring up, you know, our dog teams. I mean, it's sad, and I can explain to people all of the hardships that our people face and everything that we go through, and it's still not enough. But as soon as I bring up these dogs, they're like, oh my God, those poor things, and it's, I get it. But, we're people too, so just trying to find, a way to get into people's hearts. I think that's the biggest thing, is if you lead these movements with love, if you lead everything you do with good intention and with love, it comes back full circle. And I feel like people are open to learning more if you approach it with love. People, are willing to hear you and are willing to be a part of your journey when you're coming from a place of love. And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned from my community is, not just our love for our people, and our culture, our languages, our traditions, and our lands, but it's the love that we share collectively that keeps us moving, that keeps us hopeful. And I think another great teaching from all of that, and living in Alaska and dog mushing and hunting. And, when I go back home, that's what I go home to. My mom still hunts. It's actually funny. I haven't been hunting in like a few years, and it feels weird. It feels so weird to me. And it's also because, the caribou route the migration route has changed because of the climate crisis. I mean, it's not just our salmon. Our salmon depleted so much. It went from thousands, it went from 10,000 getting to my village. And mind you, my village is the furthest up north. So we're waiting for the fish to come up, and all the other villages below us got all their fish. So we're waiting for the last bit until it gets into Canada. And that's still like 10,000, 20,000 fish. Last year, they counted about less than 600. And so that's why we're banned from fishing. They're not banning these commercial fishing industry. They're not thinking about the bycatch, of all of the salmon that they toss. It's millions of salmon that they toss, and our communities can't eat. We can't, feed our animals. We can't feed our families. We can't feed our communities. And for hunting within my territory, we didn't see caribou for like 5 years. And so within the last 2 years, we're starting to see them come back, but not in the big herds that they used to come back in. We only see like 20, and usually we'd see hundreds, thousands in a herd. And, my little brother, he's the cultural bearer of my community. There's only 15 people in my tribe. There's actually collectively 20, and they don't all live there, but there's 15 people that live in my village, and they're all elders. And my mom and my little brother and her husband are like the only people that, really do stuff for our community. So my little brother, when he first saw that caribou were coming, he's like an avid hunter and trapper and fisher. He provides for our family and our community. My mom now just depends on my little brother to do that, so she doesn't have to do it anymore, which is really nice. But he brought back 5 caribou in one day, and he gave it all out to the entire community. He fed all of the elders in our family, and that is the biggest blessing. I mean, I remember getting that news, and I literally started crying because it's so sad to go home and not to be able to eat, our food, and not to be able to be in community with each other, because when we're not getting our food, we can't have potlatches, we can't have ceremony, we can't be, connected like that. And so it really is so, important to really look to, Indigenous communities and think about their food sovereignty and think about their food security, and how the climate crisis is impacting how our communities are being fed and feeding each other. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our communities still greatly depend on our ways of life. I mean, especially in Alaska, my community, we have one store, and it's not even in our village. It's like far away. And one bag of chips is $15. So we can't afford to go to the store. And a lot of the time, those stores are like so old and they don't get shipments. So if you're paying $15 for a stale bag of chips, or you're paying $20 for expired milk. So it sucks, So that's why we strongly depend on our ways of life. That's why it's so, so important that people are starting to see what's going on in the Arctic, are starting to see how fast we're thawing, starting to see, all of the threats. They're trying to build a road to nowhere, to a mining site next to more native villages. And yet all of these oil and gas encampments are surrounding other native communities, and all those communities can't drink their water. Their kids are being birthed with health defects, and we can't eat the animals in those regions either. They're severely contaminated. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so, it's so important that Alaska gets the same amount of visibility as every other place. And I think that's been the biggest thing in my advocacy work, is making sure that not only do we have that visibility, but we have people, especially in my line of work in fashion. I bring this up all the time because, in fashion, no one really wants to talk about how fashion impacts the world. But when I'm sitting there right in front of your face and I'm telling you how my people, how my family are being impacted, you can't ignore that. I mean, you're literally sitting in front of somebody that has real life experiences. And I think that's the most important part about this movement is, it's not just the data. I mean, you can, sit here in front of CEOs and spit all of the data in their face, and they would still be like, well, and they lose that part of their humanity. But if you're able to sit in front of them and share that lived experience, share how that's actively harming a community, they may or may not care, but it reminds them of who they are and how human they are and how that can easily be them. And so, it's really important to share that lived aspect so that it makes it more real for people and it gets them to actually give up, to care.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of leaving out of various U.S. places or quote unquote colonies, Puerto Rico, also American Samoa, Guam, like all these places that are like the miner's canary, so to speak, about these very intense climate impacts. I really appreciated how you spoke about like the macro problem of climate change impacting like the daily lives of people. And I think that's an important takeaway. And as you were speaking, I felt inspired to share with you all a very, very sneak peek of something I'm working on, which is, just a consideration as we're in this like critical moment in time where the macro is going to impact all of our micro lives, right? And so I'm doing an analysis right now on something called Project 25, which is a GOP-led blueprint for what happens if they gain power this coming year. And so some of the things that we're learning by looking through this 900-page document, it's no small feat, probably dismantle tribal co-management on federal lands, probably is most likely. Full tilt oil and gas development on federal lands and tribal lands. They want to push Congress to dismantle the Antiquities Act, which protects bears' ears and plenty of other hard-fought protections for, national quote-unquote monuments or parks, but really like our lands. Yeah, they're going to dismantle protections for Chaco Canyon, boundary waters, Bears Ears, like I said, Tongass, the Arctic, putting more lands in the control of, speaking of Alaska, the state of Alaska and away from tribes. And we all know how that has gone in the past. Here's what's surprising. They want to develop more dams in the West. They want more coal for electricity and don't want to stop any and all transition to like renewable. They want to like stop all the funding. They want to dismantle EPA, Clean Water Act. I mean, they've already like done that. And just like major privatization of the Department of Interior, which impacts Native lands and Native lives, I should say, in a big way. So we would see a major, maybe even breakup of the BIE&A, which is Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Education, and a dismantling of IHS, which is Indian Health Services. So when we go back to our rights, our sovereignty, like this is what could happen, will happen, if certain circumstances and conditions, play out in the next 6 months. So I don't want to leave on a sad note, but that is the reality. And I think we've just heard a lot of testimony to like what we're trying to do to fix the violence and the colonization that's happened in the past. And I want to stay on this trajectory of seeing more wins, seeing Ambler Road get shut down. That just happened. You spoke about that. Seeing more investment into our work, seeing more investment into you all as leaders. And I think we're in a moment in time where we can do that. We can step into our power and empower others to lead this work. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, guys.